This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Egyptian authorities say 12 militants have been killed following an attack on a South African tourist bus in the Giza region. Campaigns wrap up in Malawi ahead of the general election tomorrow. And East African Community member states head to Uganda for talks on common tariffs. Will they make a deal before July 1st? Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Saudi Arabia deposits $250 million to the Sudanese Central Bank. Well, let's start the program with the latest from Egypt, where at least 17 people have been injured in an explosion near the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza. A South African tourist bus was hit in the explosion. Most of those injured, though, were Egyptian. Security and judicial sources say a basic device containing nails and pieces of metal had been detonated remotely on the perimeter of the Grand Egyptian Museum, not far from the site of a roadside blast that hit another tourist bus in December.
With the background of the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza, the main target of the attack is clear. It's another attempt to ruin the Egyptian tourism industry, this time by hitting South African tourists. Most of those injured were Egyptians around the bus. No deaths have been reported.
All indications tell us that this is a new group. Their main purpose is to create propaganda, to attack the tourism industry, to target a church attempting to reflect that the cops are not well secured. No group has claimed responsibility in this attack and the previous similar one.
Egyptian authorities say all injuries were minor. The incident once again raises questions about Egypt's security measures.
These type of attacks are extremely difficult to spot. The explosive devices used are very small, almost ineffective. The process of choosing locations and implementing the attacks show that they are usually improvised attacks. To track these perpetrators is very difficult because mainly they operate alone.
This is the second attack against tourist buses in about 6 months, which puts a lot of pressure on Egyptian security forces. Next month, the country is expecting a huge influx of tourists as it hosts the African Cup of Nations. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's bring you now the very latest on this story from Cairo. We're joined by CGTN's Adel Al-Mahroui, and Angela Coppola joins us from Johannesburg with the South African reaction to this. Adel, let's start with you in Egypt. We know, of course, that there's just reports coming in of authorities in Egypt announcing the death of 12 militants on the outskirts of Cairo. Is there a link now between the killing of these militants and, of course, this bus explosion that has taken place?
The Egyptian Interior Ministry announced that it has killed about 12 militants in 2 different locations on the outskirts of Cairo, on the eastern side and the western side of the Egyptian capital. It believes that the militants who were armed, according to the police statement, and were killed in a crossfire belong to a group called Hasm, which is an armed group that has been affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood. In any case, the police did not indicate or give any relation officially that they are related to the bus attack that took place on Sunday. And usually, whenever there is such an operation or an attack by the Hasm group, they would take and claim responsibility for such an attack. But this does not happen. No group has claimed responsibility yet for the bus attack, which doesn't really mean, according as you've heard in my report earlier, that it doesn't mean that there is a specific group or a known group that has been conducting this attack and the previous one, which have been quite tactically very similar. So it's still not clear who is behind the South African tourist bus attack.
And Angelo, let's bring you in here now from Johannesburg. Of course, as we know, a South African tourist bus was struck in that attack. Has there been any official comments so far from the South African government?
Lindy, the South African government are fairly tight-lipped at the moment. When the attack initially happened, a statement was put out saying that they were trying to determine how many people had actually been injured and if there were any deaths. Subsequent statements came out during the course of the evening, and we now know that there were 28 South Africans involved in that group that were injured to some extent. 25 of them were released from hospital late last night, and there are 3 that are still in hospital. We're not sure about the extent of their injuries just yet, but as it stands right now, we have 3 still in hospital and the other 25 making their way back home. So good luck. It's a good thing that there weren't any deaths, and obviously the relatives are going to be waiting for them to return.
Absolutely. Adele, coming back to you, as you mentioned, of course, in your report, Egypt is set to host the African Cup of Nations just next month. So how is this incident likely to impact the security preparations ahead of that tournament?
Well, it will definitely beef up the security preparation in Cairo. Already the African Cup of Nations has been quite a huge celebrated event, and Egypt knows that there will be many security challenges. There's been a general plan which will include the Egyptian police forces and the Egyptian armed forces to secure the games that will start by the end of June. And in any case, that event that has taken place will only confirm the Egyptian government's suspicion and precautions of possible attacks. The government is taking a huge security measure to maintain security not just in Cairo but also on the roads that connects the Egyptian capital to other stadiums in 4 different cities, and that will definitely not be the situation when the games happen. According to a statement from the Interior Ministry, the games will be heavily secured. The Egyptian government is taking all precautionary measures to maintain that such incidents would not happen. But again, to give a 100% non-attack proof certificate is quite impossible, particularly that these militant and extremist groups always target such events so that they can have their influence, or their attack would get a lot of international attraction, media coverage as well. So it will be quite challenging, and to put it definitely that there will be no attacks, it is quite difficult, especially that the kind of attacks that have been going on, as you've heard in the report, it's quite a small explosive device that many people or many people with extremist ideologies can learn from online and just throw it in the street. So it is quite a huge challenge, but Egypt believes that it is up for it.
Right, and Angelo, just coming back to you, you mentioned, of course, that government so far has been tight-lipped, but have we heard anything from the families of those involved in this incident? Have they started reaching out to government? Do we know what's likely to happen next in terms of bringing those South Africans back home?
Well, look, we do know that those 25 are returning back home. Straight after the blast, the Consulate General in Egypt, or in Cairo, put out a emergency number for relatives who are concerned about the whereabouts of their loved ones in Cairo or in that area, could phone and confirm whether they had the names and details of those people, whether they were injured, whether they got off without any injuries. So that was put into place. We know the 25 are returning under their own steam. We don't think the consulate's involved in bringing those people back to South Africa. As I said, those 3 people that are still injured, we're not sure about when they will be released and if they will be released in the short term, because we don't know the extent of the injuries. But as it stands right now, 25 are returning. We don't have the identities yet, but there's no question that the next of kin are going to be waiting at OR Tambo International and South African feeder airports for them to return.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Angelo Coppola joining us there live from Johannesburg, and of course Adel Al-Makhri with us from Cairo. Let's turn to news now from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The country's opposition politician, Moise Katumbi, is set to return to the country after 3 years in exile. The former governor of Katanga province his return follows a Congolese court's dismissal of 2 criminal charges, which he insisted were politically motivated. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
Thousands of supporters of Moise Katumbi are set to receive him in Lubumbashi, in the southeast of the DRC. The opposition politician returns after spending 3 years in exile. He fell out with former Congolese President Joseph Kabila in 2016 over the delay in holding elections. A court subsequently handed him a 3-year prison term over allegations of property fraud. But his conviction was recently cancelled following President Felix Tshisekedi's moves towards reconciliation in the country. Some Congolese say his return is a good sign for the DRC.
That is a good thing. We all are longing for the rule of law, because without the rule of law, there cannot be justice. Without justice, there cannot be peace. Without peace, there cannot be development.
We are very happy that President Tshisekedi has begun reconciling politicians. It shows that he's interested in having all of us build our country.
Mr. Katumbi was barred from running for president in last year's election on the basis of holding dual citizenship, which is illegal under DRC law. He chose to join other opposition leaders in a coalition that backed former presidential candidate Martin Fayulu. The former governor of Katanga province has promised to continue advocating for change in the DRC once he's back in the country. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Let's turn to Tunisia now. The country has 5 juvenile re-education centers. The Ministry of Justice and the General Directorate of Prisons and Re-education aim to accompany, educate and train young offenders to stop them from returning to crime. During the holy month of Ramadan, many families were allowed to break their fast with their children.
This is one of the few occasions on which the doors of this high-security facility are open to the media. The Juvenile Re-education Center of Mourou City in Grand Tunis has welcomed families and non-residents during the fasting month of Ramadan.
Strengthening family ties is part of the re-education process. Here, we educate young offenders and give them a second chance.
The General Directorate of Prisons and Re-education offers many sporting, educational and cultural activities, as well as vocational training in aluminium, electricity, ironwork, woodworking, mechanic, cooking and other specialties.
Music and theatre are part of the re-education process. We give young people the opportunity to leave the center in the morning for training at a factory or at a workshop. This project is in partnership with the Ministry of Vocational Training.
101 children have lined up to break their fast with their parents. 20 families have shared this special moment.
My son's behavior has changed. He is grown up here and become more responsible. I'm happy to dine with my son.
Tunisian authorities and artists believe that art is crucial to healing youth and changing the juvenile justice system.
Immigration theatre is an ambitious and successful project in prisons and re-education centres. It reduces violence and improves the child's behaviour during and after incarceration.
Re-education experts in Tunisia maintain that incarceration carries with it the responsibility of offender rehabilitation, especially with the revolving door of recidivism.
The Ministry of Justice in Tunisia aims to increase the number of sporting and cultural activities at juvenile re-education centers after the fasting month of Ramadan. Authorities say there has been a shift in recent years from a punitive approach towards the rehabilitation of young offenders. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
In less than 24 hours, Malawi will choose a new president. Voters will also elect a new parliament and local government councillors as polls open on Tuesday. The incumbent president, Peter Mutharika, is trying to secure a second 5-year term. He's facing a stiff challenge from two competitors, one of whom was, until recently, his vice president, Saulos Chilima. The other is the leader of the second largest party in parliament, Pastor Lazarus Chakwera. The candidates have been crisscrossing the country to woo voters, and with over half the country living in poverty, Malawians are hoping that the newly elected leader will bring much needed development to the nation. Well, CGTN's Wakista Nyabwa is in the city of Blantyre in Malawi. She's following the lead up to the election and joins us now live from there. Wakista, it seems like a 3-horse race for the presidency in Malawi. Tell us about the main candidates and what they've been promising during their campaign trail.
Thank you very much. Well, there are essentially 7 candidates, but it is 3 candidates who have caught the attention of the country, and among these there is the incumbent Peter Mutharika. Peter Mutharika has been president since he secured the position in the elections in 2014, and he is campaigning on the basis of the development agenda that he has undertaken. He is credited with having brought down the rate of inflation in this country, and also having undertaken an agenda, a development agenda that has also seen a lot of infrastructure constructed during his time. However, he is going up against 2 other very strong contenders as well. There is Saulos Chilima, who until recently was a vice president and did work alongside Mutharika until he decided to challenge him. The youthful leader has spoken extensively about graft, and it is one of the major issues that comes up in this election. Chilima vowing to tackle graft and to tackle corruption, and that is the basis of his his campaign. There is also Lazarus Chakwera, and Chakwera also vied for president in the last presidential election but was defeated by the incumbent, and therefore he is hoping that this time he will be able to secure it, having done this running again against the very same candidate that beat him in the very last time. Some of the issues that are expected to shape this election are unemployment, because unemployment is very high in this country, as well as the issue of opportunities for the youth and the women, who do make up a very large chunk of the voting bloc. This country also earns a lot from agriculture, and the last few years have been difficult because of frequent periods of drought. So agriculture, people who are invested in agriculture, small-scale farmers as well as those who might be doing it on a large scale, are looking towards these candidates to tell them what they will do so that they can have more employment opportunities. There will be more investment opportunities. One of the things that the incumbent has spoken about is coming up with technical training colleges so that the youth can become skilled, and they can acquire skills that can then enable them to set up their own businesses, as the private sector cannot absorb them all at this point. However, there are a number of issues apart from unemployment and graft, and simply many issues that voters will be looking towards on Tuesday. So in less than 24 hours, Malawians will be going to the polls, and then we will be able to see which are some of the issues that swayed them in the direction of one candidate or the other. Back to you in studio.
Well, thank you, Wakista Nyabwa, for setting the scene for us there. We look forward to seeing how things unfold as Malawians go to the polls on Tuesday. Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. East African Community member states head to Uganda for talks on common tariffs. Will they make a deal before July 1st?
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
East African Community member states are set to meet in Uganda to determine how to tax goods entering the region. The negotiations come ahead of the planned implementation of the Common External Tariff on July 1st. The EAC's current Common External Tariff of 0% on raw materials and capital goods, 10% on intermediate goods and 25% on finished goods was agreed upon by the member states. Some, however, are arguing the rates have been overtaken by changes in both the region's economies and new trade issues. Well, for more perspective on this, we're now joined by Africa Kiza, who is the Program Officer for Trade Policies and Negotiations at the Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiations Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Kiza. To begin with, do you see the EAC member states reaching common ground before the planned implementation of a new common external tariff on July 1st?
Thank you for having me. To your question, we should first of all understand the fact that there are reasons as to why we have delayed in coming up with the finalization of the CET because of the numerous positions that are being advanced by different partners, countries of the region. And so this has really delayed the process which we started some time back. And so if you see the timeline that has been set, 3rd June, it shows that we are looking at having a position out of, not because we have agreed on the positions, but because we want to meet the timeline and the deadline. So that's the challenge already, that we are already acting not on the content, but rather on deadline. But yes, I think that there are still some factors which we need to look at, which will have a lot of influence on what position will be reached at in the next meeting, especially the current trade and economic structure and terrain in the East African region.
And so on that note, what is then, in your view, the biggest challenge to reaching an agreement on a common position?
There are two reasons. One, the first is that there are the current trade wars between, what I would prefer to call trade wars, or trade disagreements between some of the key members of the East African community, and especially at a time when, for example, Rwanda, who is in disagreements with Uganda, is the chair of the East African community. That's the first reason why we think that this might really be derailed. But the second issue is also the fact that we are having an agreement which we are still negotiating with the European Union, which is the Economic Partnership Agreement. And in that agreement, we are not speaking with one position. We are having countries like Kenya and Rwanda who have signed and ratified. We are having countries like Tanzania and Uganda who have not signed. The challenge is that it is a free trade agreement, and if it is implemented, automatically you will find that goods from Kenya and Rwanda will be blocked by the other partner states. So until we come up with a uniform position as partner states on free trade agreements with other third parties like European Union, we cannot have the common external tariff implemented. But also key to note is that, yes, we need to put into consideration the positions being advanced, especially by the local infant industries, especially on issues, products which are mostly commonly traded within the East African region, because we have uniform products, sugar, milk and dairy products, clothing and all that. We need to put into consideration that these are common products which we manufacture as each country, and be able to see how do we sequence the liberalization when it comes to that. Otherwise, we might be really going back to other non-tariff barriers, even if we have come up with a position of the CET.
And of course, you spoke about this trade stubbornness between Rwanda and Uganda. We know it's impacted previous negotiations within the EAC. Do you think the worst is behind us, or do you think that even this time round, this relationship might still continue to affect talks?
In my humble opinion, I will be attending that meeting actually, and I do really see that coming into effect, because the challenge is that this has become a political disagreement between parties. We have already had businesses, especially traders who are dealing in the perishable products and other products, manufactured products, do lose out, and they have started devising other trade alternatives. For example, now seeking to go to Congo rather than Rwanda. Rwanda is really our biggest trading partner in the region, whom we cannot deal with. So the challenge is that in the protocol establishing the EAC, it is only the president, the chair of the secretary of the EAC, who can call a meeting to, for example, iron out disagreements between partner states. Unfortunately, in this case, it is Rwanda who is the chair. So I don't see Rwanda calling on Uganda to agree on a difference that is between Rwanda and Uganda. That is the scenario we are in. So the challenge is that, yes, we might, for the sake of having a common position, decide to agree and have the CET. But at the same time, that would not stop the countries between, like Rwanda and Uganda, to start still bilaterally fighting each other when it comes to trade wars and all that. So that's the challenge, that we need to first of all address the underlying trade differences between Uganda and Rwanda, and then be able to go at the regional level to be able to agree as a region. Otherwise, we will have a regional position which will not be respected by either of the parties between Uganda and Rwanda. That is the scenario that we are in, and I do hope that there is something that we can address when it comes to the meeting tomorrow.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Africa Kiza, joining us there from Kampala, Uganda. Now, on to the U.S. ban on Chinese tech giant Huawei. U.S. tech firm Google has suspended some business with Huawei. The move could hobble Huawei's smartphone business outside China, as the company will lose access to updates to Google's Android operating system. Future versions of Huawei smartphones running on Android also face loss of access to popular services, including the Google Play Store, Gmail and YouTube apps. But a Google spokesperson says current Huawei smartphones with Google apps will continue to be able to use and download updates provided by Google. He says Huawei will only be able to use the public version of Android and will not be able to get access to Google services. While staying on the U.S. Huawei ban, the recent U.S. policy aimed at restricting Huawei is feared it could affect dozens of companies which supply to the Chinese firm, including U.S. tech giant Qualcomm. Despite Huawei stating it is prepared for the ban with backup plans, other companies may not be ready for the results. Here's more on that story.
No problem without American chips. That's the message of Huawei's founder Ren Zhengfei to Japanese media on Saturday. And Huawei affiliate HiSilicon said it's been preparing for U.S. restrictions for years and has a backup plan. An internal letter says, quote, spare tires it has been working on will no longer be spare. The latest round of bickering came as the U.S. Commerce Department put Huawei on its so-called entity list, which bans the company from buying components from American firms without U.S. government approval. Obtaining such approval would not be easy. On the Federal Register, a posting says the U.S. government will review license applications under a, quote, policy of resumption of denial. And the order takes effect immediately. Huawei suppliers could be hit hard. The company's global supply chain includes 33 companies from the US, including Intel and Qualcomm. Last year, these companies made $11 billion from Huawei. Other companies outside the US would not be able to sell to Huawei if their products have American components. The stock market was quick to react. On Thursday, Qualcomm fell 4% and Broadcom fell 2.3%. Huawei dominates the world market in telecom equipment. At the end of 2018, it had 29% of global market share. In the smartphone market, it has also risen to surpass Apple, standing just behind Samsung. On Friday, the U.S. Commerce Department said it was considering scaling back restrictions so that Huawei can keep serving its customers' existing network. But it would still not be allowed to buy American components to manufacture new products. Still, Huawei's founder said the company's growth may only slightly slow down due to the ban, while the U.S. government will lose credibility by repeatedly threatening its trade partners. He said Huawei has done nothing illegal.
China was given special recognition at Africa Integration Day in Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou. Here's CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy with the details.
A total of 18 countries took part in this colorful event. Each one of them entertained guests by showcasing their cultural activities. Students of the IAM Institute, under the artistic direction of the Chinese teachers, performed Chinese dance choreographies and Chinese martial arts.
Through this African Integration Day, we want our students to become more aware of the importance of regional cooperation and integration. The world is globalizing. We need to get to know each other and become aware of the benefits of complementary relationships.
Our goal is to present Chinese culture in all its form to all communities here. The event that has brought us here deserves to be celebrated to promote culture and cultural diversity, cohesion and integration.
La culture chinoise avec ses différentes facettes. The Chinese community taught other nationalities how to practice calligraphy and the Chinese tea art. Participants also played a puzzle of games and were taught on how to prepare various Chinese food recipes.
La Chine n'est pas en Afrique. Though China is not an African country, we have participated in the African Integration Day. This shows how important integration is for us. For those who did not know the Chinese culture, the opportunity has been given to them to discover it and know a little bit more about China. All
the African cultural performances I have seen have relayed different messages about the African culture. The African culture is really charming. People dance very well.
Through the ambassador, China granted scholarships worth $4,900 to deserving students at the institute. China also pledged 100 Chinese books and 50 CDs to equip the IAM Institute library. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN.
South Africa is home to nearly 80% of the world's rhino population, but since the early 2000s, they've been poached to near extinction. More than 1,000 rhinos are killed in the country each year for their horns. South African conservationist Gareth Putter is campaigning to end the scourge and has challenged everyone to fight the war on poaching. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
Rhino poaching is being treated as a war. South Africa is home to around 20,000 rhinos, some 80% of the worldwide population. But the species is in danger of disappearing.
We are losing 2 to 3 rhino per day in South Africa to the rhino poaching crisis, and we can't let them go extinct on our watch, and we are getting there. Some species of rhino have been around for 50 million years. There used to be about 500,000 wild rhino roaming the planet, and we are literally down to about 29,000 wild rhino on the planet at the moment. So we literally have lost about 96%.
For 20 days, Rocking for Rhinos founder Gareth Putter has lived on this 16-meter high tower, hoping to raise awareness and money for rhino anti-poaching beneficiaries.
I'm living in this little box for a while. I'm not coming down, and I'm trying to prove a point, show the world that there is a problem, let's address it, and whilst doing that, simultaneously using the platform to raise funds.
The aim is to live here for a month. Gareth has kept himself busy, but Rocking for Rhinos needs more support to reach their target.
We need help, we do need assistance. We can't let things like this happen. There's a balance in nature and humans are destroying the balance all around us. And if nature goes, we go. So yeah, I'm passionate about it because there's a problem with nature and we have to stand up and get involved.
Rocking for Rhinos aims to raise a minimum of $150,000 with this initiative and is challenging people around the world to put an end to rhino poaching. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Chirping of birds, sounds of whispering trees, burbling of streams. When sunlight sets the forest's leaves aglow, and waterfall surges down from the mountain, we see and hear the Earth's wondrous beauty. The Earth is meant to be appreciated, and the life of its inhabitants deserves our endless exploration. Come with CGTN to listen and see, in chorus of life, to marvel at nature and life.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in your business news. Saudi Arabia deposits $250 million to the Sudanese central bank. And Zimbabwe secures $500 million to support its interbank currency trading.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your business news, Saudi Arabia says it's deposited $250 million to the Sudanese central bank. In collaboration with the United Arab Emirates, it pledged to send $3 billion worth of aid to Sudan after mass protests led to the ouster of President Omar al-Bashir in April. The former president has been charged over his role in the killings of demonstrators in Khartoum. He and others are accused of inciting and being complicit in the deaths of those protesters who were demanding his resignation and civilian rule. The financial move is aimed at strengthening Sudan's financial position to achieve more stability in the exchange rate. Oil supplies are considered to be sufficient as stockpiles rise despite anticipated drops in output from Iran and Venezuela. Members of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries recently met in Jeddah to discuss the stabilization of the volatile oil market. Concerns have been raised following tensions between the US and Iran in the Gulf. The OPEC meeting comes days after recent sabotage attacks against tankers in Gulf waters and the bombing of a Saudi pipeline. In April, US President Donald Trump demanded buyers of Iranian oil to stop purchasing by the beginning of May or face sanctions in a bid to bring Iran's oil exports to zero.
It is critical that we don't make hasty decisions. Given the conflicting data, the complexity involved, and the evolving situation. Again, while keeping inventories under control between now and then and for the remainder of 2019. That will be our critical deliverable, I believe, for the industry and the global economy.
And to Zimbabwe now. The country's central bank has secured a $500 million loan to support interbank currency trading. This is expected to ease the severe dollar crunch that has brought critical commodity shortages to the country. Zimbabwe recently introduced a new currency, the RTGS dollar, and launched an interbank trading platform where businesses and individuals could buy and sell US dollars. Dollars have, however, been scarce on the official market, where it fetches 3.4 RTGS dollars compared to $6.3 on the black market. The scarcity has seen companies and individuals opt for sale on the black markets due to those higher premiums. South Africa's power utility Eskom has raised $361 million through drawdowns against a portion of committed loans. The China Development Bank committed nearly $280 million through issuance of domestic bonds. The state-owned utility has been facing a crisis with high operational costs and failure of its new coal-generating plants, Medupi and Kusile. Eskom supplies more than 90% of South Africa's electricity, but has a $27.8 billion debt that is threatening the country's credit rating. Now, the United States policy of trade protectionism is predicted to interfere with the economic development and also have a negative effect on the global economy. In 2018, the U.S. faced trade deficits, which resulted in a shortage of domestic savings. The country recently opted to impose tariffs on imported goods to help cut its trade benefits.
So in this regard, it's a kind of protectionism indeed that the US is doing, which is against the principles of WTO regulations as well as that of globalization. Oblige China to look for another market than the US, like African countries, maybe Asian countries, maybe Latin American countries, maybe European countries and others. So this will enhance Chinese partnership with the rest of the world in terms of trade, and also there are some products that that China was importing from the US, like agricultural products and like that. So this also give for other countries, to export to China, like neighboring Asian countries, as well as African countries, Latin American and others, that it will provide them an opportunity that, they will have, they will export to China.
Market stock of ride-hailing giant Uber didn't jump after the company priced its IPO towards the lower end of its stated range more than a week ago. Are investors holding back? CGTN's Giles Gibson reports from Washington.
It's been a week since smiling Uber executives rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. But out on the trading floor, there were whispers about the company's finances and business model. Some analysts say Uber's initial public offering was already set up for disappointment after being hyped up.
So the fact that Uber's IPO was not the success story that it should have been isn't really about the fundamentals of the company today. It's more about the fact that their valuation got too high too fast in the past, and that severely constrained their ability to set a fair price for their IPO when they went public.
Uber's CEO Dara Khosrowshahi put the disappointing IPO down to the US-China trade talks, which hit an impasse the very same day Uber went public. But he insisted the company is measuring success in 5 to 10 years, not in one day. Other Wall Street insiders, though, like Santosh Rao with Manhattan Venture Partners, do see weaknesses in Uber's fundamentals right now. In 2018, the company's revenue was up by 43% from the year before, but that growth in revenue is slowing down.
That's a huge problem for a company valued at 80 billion, which is what they wanted to do at the time. So when you have your price for perfection at that level, you can't show revenues. At least, okay, profits we can wait. We'll believe you. Okay, we'll give you the benefit of doubt about profits. But revenue, that's your thing. You got to grow that.
This year, Uber has been paying out around $100 million per month in driver incentives. They're doing that to encourage drivers to stick with Uber instead of switching to Lyft or another competitor. The more drivers there are, the less time you spend waiting for that little car to pop up on your screen. But analysts say Uber can't keep pumping that amount of cash into driver incentives forever.
10 years from now, if Uber is still spending the same amount of money on driver incentives, then they probably won't be in business. They have to build both passenger and driver loyalty in ways other than paying them more to sort of drive on our platform or charging below cost to use our platform.
And we demand $20 an hour per minimum.
Just before Uber's IPO debut, drivers around the world went on strike for better wages and working conditions. Uber has already tested its vision of self-driving cars replacing those drivers, but like profitability, that could still be several years down the road. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
Time for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. In Kenya, the Palette Cafe in Nairobi promotes a more inclusive society for the hearing impaired.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Here in Kenya, disabled people make up around 10% of the population. Many have limited access to education, health and employment. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala takes us to Palette Cafe in Nairobi, which is promoting a more inclusive society and creating opportunities for the hearing impaired.
Palette Cafe is our little silent world, garden ambience, where there's all the love. We have a huge family, and it's all one. he decided to hire people with hearing impairment just to prove to society that these guys have no disabilities. They're just as able as you and I, and they have talents, and they need to live a fruitful life. For them to live that fruitful life, they need to be empowered. So that's exactly what we did. To start with, we had to show them how to approach clients, because most of them they're not used to being out in the front with people, so we had to bring that out of them, show them how to interact with people. Then we had to train them on the menu. Once you come in and they give you the menu, there are a few signs for some of the coffees. Actually, it's coffees and teas mostly. The signs are there, but for the rest of the things, they're numbered. Everything has a code. So in case you cannot explain something properly, you point it out to them. They always have a notebook and a biro. They can give it to you and you write down what you want. If there's any question, they'll ask you the question and you respond.
Very different from other restaurants, only because you begin to realize that there is much more ways to communicate than just speech, and the food is amazing. So I mean, and that's what your restaurant should do first of all, is to eat and to have an experience.
Well, let's take a short break. Your sports news up next. Heavy rains interrupt day one of the 2019 ICC Africa T20 World Cup qualifiers in Uganda.
Africa Live. Find your voice.